I thought I was failing as a parent until my 12-year-old daughter did something that made me realize I'd been raising her exactly right all along. And it happened in the most unexpected place, a grocery store checkout line. You know that feeling when you're constantly second-guessing every parenting decision you make? That was me, every single day. 3 years after losing my wife, I was still fumbling through this whole single dad thing, wondering if I was screwing up my daughter Emma beyond repair. All the other parents seemed so relaxed. Their kids were popular, confident, invited to every party. Meanwhile, my Emma was the quiet one who got picked on for being too nice, the kid who chose honesty over fitting in, who stood up for the weird kids even when it made her a target. I kept asking myself, was I raising her to be a doormat? Should I be teaching her to be tougher, more selfish, more normal? Every night, I'd lie awake wondering if my constant lessons about kindness and helping others were actually hurting her chances at happiness. But then came that Saturday afternoon at the grocery store. Just a regular trip for milk and cereal that turned into the moment everything clicked into place. The moment I realized that all those times I worried I was being too strict about values, too focused on character over popularity, too old-fashioned in a modern world, I was actually doing exactly what I was supposed to do. What happened in that checkout line didn't just change how I saw my daughter. It changed how I saw myself as a father. And it all started with $23.47, an embarrassed elderly woman, and a 12-year-old girl who proved that sometimes the most important lessons are the ones that seem to matter least. My name is Jake, and if I'm being honest, I never thought I'd be doing this parenting thing alone. When Sarah died 3 years ago from cancer, Emma was only 9, and I went from being the fun weekend dad to the guy responsible for everything. Homework, braids, period talks that I was definitely not prepared for. We'd been living in Portland, where Sarah and I had built our life together. She was a kindergarten teacher, the kind who knew every kid's birthday and kept granola bars in her desk for the ones who came to school hungry. I was in IT, working remotely most days, which seemed perfect back then because it meant I could help with school pickup and soccer practice. But after Sarah passed, everything in that house felt like a museum of memories we couldn't escape. Emma would sit in Sarah's reading chair for hours, clutching one of her mom's sweaters. I'd find myself setting 2 coffee cups out of habit, then staring at the extra one like it might somehow bring her back. That's when I made the decision to move. Fresh start, new town, new opportunities. At least that's what I told myself. Really, I was running from the ghost of the life we used to have. We ended up in Millbrook, a small town about 2 hours south where my brother lived, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, which felt both comforting and terrifying. Emma handled the move better than I expected, but then again, she'd always been mature beyond her years. Even before losing her mom, she was the kid who noticed when someone was sitting alone at lunch, who shared her snacks without being asked, who cried when she accidentally stepped on a bug. Sarah used to say Emma had an old soul, and I was starting to understand what she meant. But here's the thing about small towns. The parenting styles are different. Back in Portland, we were surrounded by families who valued the same things we did. Kindness, education, community service. In Millbrook, I quickly realized I might be the odd one out. Take Emma's new school, for example. During the first parent-teacher conference, Mrs. Henderson told me Emma was too sensitive and might benefit from toughening up a bit. She said this after explaining how Emma had spent her recess helping a special needs kid who'd been knocked down by some older boys, instead of playing with the popular girls who'd invited her to join their group. She needs to learn to pick her battles, Mrs. Henderson said, like helping a hurt kid was somehow the wrong choice. That's when the doubt really started creeping in. Was I raising Emma to be taken advantage of? All those bedtime conversations where Sarah and I had emphasized treating others with kindness, standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves, choosing what's right over what's easy. Were we setting our daughter up for failure? I started noticing things that made my stomach twist. Emma would come home from school and tell me about her day with this matter-of-fact acceptance of being excluded or picked on. The girls in my class didn't save me a seat at lunch again, she'd say while doing homework, like it was just another fact of life. But it's okay, I sat with Marcus. He was eating alone and seemed sad. Marcus was the kid with thick glasses and a stutter who got teased for reading during recess. Of course, Emma sat with him. Of course, she chose the lonely kid over the chance to fight for acceptance with the popular crowd. Part of me was proud, but a bigger part of me was terrified I was failing her. I'd watch other parents at school pickup, laughing and chatting while their confident kids ran up with stories about parties and sleepovers and drama that seemed so normal for 12-year-olds. Meanwhile, Emma would walk out quietly, usually carrying someone else's forgotten backpack or helping a younger kid find their parent. The other dads would talk about teaching their kids to stand up for themselves and not be pushovers. They'd share stories about their kids getting into minor trouble and laugh it off as boys being boys or girls figuring out the social hierarchy. I'd nod along, but inside I was wondering if I was the only one who still cared about raising a genuinely good human being. Don't get me wrong, Emma wasn't a pushover. When she saw injustice, she spoke up. When someone was being bullied, she intervened. When a teacher made an unfair rule, she'd respectfully question it, but she did it all with this quiet dignity that seemed to make her invisible to the other kids her age. At night, after she'd go to bed, I'd sit in my kitchen and replay every parenting decision Sarah and I had made. Had we been too idealistic, too focused on character over social skills? I'd think about Sarah's voice saying, "We're not raising her to be popular, Jake. We're raising her to be good." But what if being good wasn't enough? What if I was setting Emma up for a lifetime of being overlooked, taken advantage of, left behind, while more aggressive kids got ahead? These thoughts consumed me for months. Every time Emma chose kindness over self-interest. Every time she helped someone instead of helping herself. Every time she came home alone instead of with a group of friends. I questioned everything. I had no idea that all my doubts were about to be answered in the most unexpected way possible. Emma's personality became more apparent to me with each passing week in Millbrook. She had this way of moving through the world that was both careful and fearless. Careful with other people's feelings, fearless when it came to doing what she thought was right. It was beautiful and terrifying to watch as her father. At her new middle school, she quickly became known as the girl who would lend you a pencil even if it was her last one, who would sit with you if you were crying in the hallway, who would speak up if she saw someone being treated unfairly. The teachers loved her, but I started to worry that being the good kid was becoming her entire identity. One afternoon, she came home with a story that perfectly captured my growing concerns. A group of 8th grade boys had been picking on a 6th grader named Tyler, taking his lunch money and calling him names. Instead of walking past like everyone else, Emma had marched right up to them and told them to stop. "What did they say?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "They laughed and said I should mind my own business," Emma replied, pulling her homework out of her backpack with the same calm she used to discuss the weather. But then Tyler looked at me and I could see he was about to cry, so I told him that picking on someone smaller than you just proves you're weak inside. My heart stopped. "Emma, honey, you can't just—" "It's okay, Dad." They called me a few names and walked away. Tyler said, "Thank you." She looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that reminded me so much of Sarah. "Mom always said that silence makes you part of the problem, right?" She was right, of course. That was exactly what Sarah would have said. But Sarah had never had to worry about her 12-year-old daughter making enemies with 8th grade bullies. This became the pattern. Emma would come home with stories of small acts of courage and kindness that made me simultaneously proud and worried sick. She tutored struggling classmates during lunch instead of socializing. She invited the new kid from Guatemala to sit with her, even though he barely spoke English, and it made her table weird by middle school standards. She organized a bake sale to help the janitor whose wife was in the hospital, even though none of the popular kids participated. Meanwhile, I watched other parents navigate these years with what seemed like much less stress. At soccer practice, I'd overhear conversations about teaching kids to look out for number one and not get too involved in other people's drama. These parents seemed to have figured out some secret formula for raising kids who were both successful and happy. "You're overthinking this," my brother Mike told me one evening when I confided my concerns. "Emma's a good kid. That's what matters." "But what if being good isn't enough?" I asked. "What if I'm setting her up to be taken advantage of her whole life? What if she never learns to prioritize herself?" Mike shook his head. "You sound like you're trying to talk yourself out of raising the kid Sarah would have been proud of." That hit hard because he was right. Every value Emma displayed, every choice she made, every instinct she followed, it all traced back to the foundation Sarah and I had built together. But without Sarah there to reassure me, I second-guessed everything. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult week in October. Emma had been working on a group project with 3 other girls for their social studies class. She'd done most of the research, created the visual aids, and written the bulk of the presentation. The night before it was due, one of the girls called to say they'd decided to present without Emma because her part didn't fit with their vision. I watched my daughter's face crumple as she hung up the phone. For a moment, I thought she might finally get angry, finally stand up for herself in the way I'd been secretly hoping she would. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "I guess I'll just present by myself tomorrow. At least I know my research is good." That's when I lost it. "Emma, you can't just let people walk all over you like this," I exploded. "You did all the work and they're stealing it. You need to tell the teacher. You need to fight back. You need to—" "Dad," her voice was quiet but firm, "getting angry won't change what happened, and telling on them would just make them hate me more." "Maybe they should hate you," I said, immediately regretting the words. "Maybe it's better than being invisible." Emma stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Disappointment. Not sadness, not hurt, but genuine disappointment in me. "Is that really what you think?" she asked softly. "That I should be mean to people so they'll notice me?" I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know what I think anymore, Em. I want you to be happy. I want you to have friends. I want you to fit in." I am happy, she said, sitting across from me. And I do have friends. They're just not the friends you think I should have. She was right, and I knew it. Emma did have friends. Marcus, the quiet boy who loved books. Sophia, the girl with anxiety who rarely spoke in class. Tyler, the sixth grader she'd defended. They weren't the popular kids, but they were loyal, kind, genuine friendships built on mutual respect and care. It took everything changed during what should have been a routine grocery run. That Saturday started like any other. Emma had finished her homework early and asked if she could come with me to the store. Usually, she preferred staying home with a book, so I was happy for the company. We drove to the big grocery store on the edge of town, chatting about her upcoming science fair project and whether we should try making homemade pizza for dinner. I had no idea that this ordinary trip would become the moment everything clicked into place. The grocery store was absolutely packed that Saturday afternoon. It was one of those perfect fall days when everyone in town seemed to have the same idea. Stock up for the week, grab ingredients for Sunday dinner, maybe pick up some Halloween decorations while they were at it. The parking lot was a maze of shopping carts and frustrated drivers circling for spots. Emma and I managed to find a space near the back and made our way inside. The store was buzzing with that particular energy of weekend shopping. Kids whining for cereal, couples debating dinner plans, elderly folks taking their time in the produce section. Emma grabbed a cart and immediately started organizing our list by aisle, a habit she'd picked up from Sarah. Dairy first, then produce, then the middle aisles, she said matter-of-factly, pushing the cart with the serious concentration of someone half her age. It's more efficient that way. I smiled, watching her navigate through the crowd with careful politeness, saying, "Excuse me," to everyone, waiting patiently when someone blocked the aisle while checking their phone. Even grocery shopping she approached with the same thoughtful consideration she brought to everything else. We made good time through our list. Emma chatted about school while we picked out apples, told me about a book she was reading while we grabbed milk and eggs. It was one of those easy, comfortable moments that reminded me why I loved spending time with my daughter. No drama, no conflict, just the simple pleasure of doing ordinary things together. But as we headed toward the checkout lanes, I could see we were in for a wait. It was that busy time of day when every register was open, but the lines still stretched back into the aisles. The express lane was moving fastest, but we had too many items. The regular lanes were all backed up with full carts and weekend shoppers in no particular hurry. "That one looks shortest," Emma said, pointing to lane 7. The cashier was a teenager I didn't recognize, probably new, working with the slightly frantic energy of someone still learning the ropes. There were only 3 people ahead of us, which seemed manageable. We settled in to wait, Emma amusing herself by reading the magazine headlines while I checked my phone. The line moved slowly but steadily. A young mom with a toddler checked out first, the kid grabbing candy from the display while she juggled her wallet and car keys. Then a college-aged guy buying what looked like ingredients for a party: chips, soda, frozen pizza. That's when we got to the elderly woman directly in front of us. She was probably in her 70s, with carefully styled gray hair and a cardigan that had seen better days. Her cart wasn't full, just the basics. Bread, milk, a few canned goods, some bananas that were probably on sale, the kind of practical shopping that spoke of someone on a fixed budget who planned every purchase. I noticed her hands shaking slightly as she began unloading her cart onto the conveyor belt. She moved slowly, deliberately, the way people do when every movement requires effort. Emma noticed too. I saw her watching with that quiet attention she gave to people who seemed to need extra kindness. The teenage cashier started scanning items with mechanical efficiency, barely looking up. The total began climbing on the display, $23.47. Not a huge amount, but I could see the woman mentally calculating as each item was scanned, her lips moving slightly as she kept track. When the last item went through, she reached into her purse with those same shaky hands and pulled out a worn wallet. She fumbled through it, counting bills, then pulled out what looked like a debit card. $23. $47, the cashier announced, already looking past her to our cart. The woman inserted her card into the reader and waited. We all waited. The machine beeped, and the cashier's expression changed. "It's declined," he said, not unkindly, but with the impatience of someone who'd dealt with this before. "Do you have another card?" I watched the woman's face flush red. She fumbled through her wallet again, pulling out another card. This one looked even more worn than the first. "Try this one," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the store's background noise. The second card went in. Another beep. Another decline. "Ma'am, do you have cash?" the cashier asked, his voice getting a little sharper. Behind us, I could hear the line growing restless. Someone sighed loudly. A cartwheel squeaked as people shifted impatiently. The woman's hands were shaking more now as she opened her wallet and counted out crumpled bills. Let me see, $18 and... She counted coins from the bottom of her purse. $18.63. The cashier looked at the register display, then back at her. "You're still short, $4.84. The silence that followed was excruciating. The woman stared at her groceries, Basic necessities, nothing extravagant. Then back at her empty wallet, I could see her trying to decide what to put back, what she could live without. Maybe I don't need the milk, she said quietly, reaching for the gallon. Ma'am, you're holding up the line, someone called from behind us. I turned to see a middle-aged man in a business suit checking his watch with obvious irritation. Some of us have places to be. The woman's face went from red to pale. Her hands were shaking so badly now she could barely hold onto the milk carton. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, she kept repeating, her voice getting smaller. The teenage cashier looked around helplessly, clearly out of his depth. I can call a manager if you want to put some stuff back, he offered. That'll take forever, the businessman complained. Can't she just figure this out faster? Emma had gone very still beside me. I could see her watching the whole scene unfold with that intense focus she got when something bothered her. Her hands were gripping the cart handle, and I recognized the signs. She was processing, thinking, getting ready to act. Just put back whatever you can't afford, another voice added from somewhere in the line. We don't have all day. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears as she started reaching for items to remove. First the milk, then the bread, trying to calculate what she could eliminate to make the numbers work. Her movements were getting more frantic, more desperate. I'm sorry, she kept whispering. I'm so sorry. I thought I had enough. I'm so sorry. That's when I felt Emma let go of the cart. I looked down at her, and I could see something in her expression I'd seen before. That same quiet determination she'd shown when confronting the bullies, when helping the struggling classmate, when standing up for what she believed was right. But this time felt different. This time, I could sense that whatever she was about to do would change everything. The woman was still fumbling with her groceries, trying to decide what she could live without, when Emma stepped forward. The businessman behind us was getting louder. Other people were joining in with complaints about the wait, and the teenage cashier looked like he wanted to disappear. But Emma wasn't looking at any of them. She was looking at the elderly woman with those serious brown eyes, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. All those lessons about kindness, about helping others, about doing what's right even when it's hard, they were all coming together in this moment. I held my breath, suddenly understanding that I was about to witness something important, something that would answer all my questions about the kind of person I was raising. Emma stepped forward with that quiet confidence I'd seen her use when defending other kids at school, but this time it felt different, more purposeful, more certain. Excuse me, she said softly, her voice cutting through the growing murmur of impatient customers. The elderly woman looked up, tears still threatening to spill over. The teenage cashier paused mid-reach for the milk carton. Even the businessman behind us stopped checking his watch. I'd like to pay the difference, Emma said, her voice steady and clear. The woman blinked, confusion replacing the panic in her eyes. What, sweetheart? The $4.84, Emma continued, already reaching into the small purse she carried, the one with her allowance money that she'd been saving for weeks. I'd like to pay it so you can keep all your groceries. The entire checkout lane went silent. I felt my heart stop completely. Oh no, honey, I couldn't, the woman started, but Emma was already counting out bills. It's okay, Emma said with that matter-of-fact tone she used when she'd made up her mind about something. My mom always said that when we can help, we should help, and I can help. I watched, frozen, as my 12-year-old daughter counted out 5 crumpled dollar bills. Money she'd been saving from allowances and birthday gifts, money she'd planned to spend on a new book series she'd been wanting. She handed it to the cashier without hesitation. Here, she said simply, for her groceries. The teenage cashier looked at the money, then at Emma, then at me. Are you sure? I'm sure, Emma replied, then turned to the elderly woman. You shouldn't have to choose between milk and bread. Everyone needs both. That's when the woman started crying for real. Not the frustrated, embarrassed tears from before, but deep, grateful sobs that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than the grocery store checkout line. Sweetheart, she whispered, reaching out to touch Emma's hand. You don't even know me. I don't need to know you, Emma said gently. I just need to know you're hungry, and I can help with that. The businessman behind us had gone completely quiet. In fact, the entire line had fallen silent, everyone watching this exchange with expressions ranging from surprise to something that looked like shame. The cashier processed the payment with shaking hands, clearly moved by what he was witnessing. Your total is covered, he told the woman softly. All of it. But Emma wasn't done. Do you need help carrying your bags to your car? She asked the woman. Some of them look heavy. The woman was crying harder now, clutching Emma's hand like a lifeline. I don't know what to say. This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in such a long time. You don't have to say anything, Emma replied. Just maybe when you see someone else who needs help, you can help them too. That's what my mom used to call paying it forward. That's when something extraordinary happened. The businessman behind us stepped forward, pulling out his wallet. Wait, he said, his voice rough. I want to... Here. He handed a $20 bill to the woman. For next time, so you don't have to worry. The woman stared at the money in disbelief. "I can't take this from strangers." "We're not strangers," said a voice from further back in line. A middle-aged woman with 2 kids was approaching, holding out a $10 bill. "We're neighbors, and neighbors help each other." Suddenly, it was like a dam had burst. Person after person stepped forward, offering money, gift cards, phone numbers. The line that had been full of impatient, frustrated shoppers transformed into a community of people who had been reminded of something they'd forgotten. "I work at the senior center," one woman said, pressing a business card into the elderly woman's hand. "We have a food pantry. Please call me." "My church has a grocery assistance program," added another voice. "No questions asked." I stood there watching this unfold, my throat tight with emotion, finally understanding what I'd been missing all along. This wasn't about Emma being too soft or too giving. This was about her being exactly who she was supposed to be. This was about the values Sarah and I had instilled in her taking root and growing into something beautiful. The elderly woman was overwhelmed, clutching her bags and the money and business cards people had given her. But she kept looking back at Emma with an expression of pure wonder. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked. "Emma," my daughter replied. "What's yours?" "Margaret. Margaret Chen." The woman paused, studying Emma's face. "You know, you look familiar. Do you go to Millbrook Middle School?" Emma nodded. "I'm in 7th grade. Margaret's face lit up with recognition. "You're the girl who volunteers in the library during lunch. I'm a retired teacher. I volunteer there too on Wednesdays. I've seen you helping the younger kids with their reading." My heart swelled. I hadn't even known Emma was volunteering at the library. "Mrs. Chen?" Emma's face brightened. "You're the one who helped me find those books about astronomy for my science project." "That's right." Margaret was smiling through her tears now. "And here you are, helping me. It seems like helping people is just who you are." Emma shrugged. That modest gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. "It's just what you do, right? When someone needs help?" Margaret looked at me over Emma's head, her eyes still wet. "You should be very proud of this young lady. Very proud." I found my voice finally, though it came out rougher than I intended. "I am. More than she knows." The cashier had finished bagging Margaret's groceries, and several people from the line insisted on helping carry them to her car. As the crowd dispersed, Margaret pulled Emma aside one more time. "I want you to know something," she said, her voice serious. "I lost my husband 6 months ago. Since then, most days have been difficult. I've been feeling invisible, forgotten. But what you did today, it reminded me that there's still kindness in the world, that there are still people who see others and care about them." Emma listened with that focused attention she gave to important things. "I'm sorry about your husband," she said quietly. "That must be really hard." "It is," Margaret admitted. "But meeting you today, it gives me hope. It reminds me that there are still good people raising good children." She turned to me then. "Your daughter has a gift. Not everyone sees the world the way she does. Not everyone chooses kindness when it costs them something. You've raised something special here." As Margaret walked away, surrounded by new friends who insisted on helping her to her car, I stood there with Emma in the now empty checkout lane, trying to process what had just happened. "Dad?" Emma's voice was small. "Are you mad that I spent my book money?" I knelt down to her level, looking into those serious brown eyes that had just seen a problem and solved it without hesitation, without calculation, without wondering what was in it for her. "Mad?" I managed to say. "Emma, I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life." "Really?" She looked surprised. "But you've been worried that that I help people too much?" "I was wrong," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I was so wrong, sweetheart. What you just did, that wasn't too much. That was exactly right. That was perfect." Emma smiled then, that radiant smile that reminded me so much of Sarah. "Mom would have done the same thing, wouldn't she?" "Yes," I whispered, pulling her into a hug. "She absolutely would have. And she would be so proud of you right now." As we finally checked out our own groceries, I realized that everything had changed. Not just the situation with Margaret, but my entire understanding of what I was doing as a parent. Emma hadn't been too soft or too giving. She'd been exactly what the world needed more of. I'd been so worried about raising a child who could survive in a harsh world that I'd almost missed the fact that I was raising a child who could make the world less harsh. The drive home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than usual. Emma sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window with a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I kept glancing at her, still processing what I'd witnessed, still trying to wrap my head around the shift that had happened in my understanding of everything. "Dad?" Emma finally broke the silence as we pulled into our driveway. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Anything." "Were you embarrassed when I gave Mrs. Chen the money?" Her voice was careful, like she was trying not to show how much the answer mattered to her. I turned off the engine and looked at her fully. "Embarrassed? Emma, why would you think that?" She shrugged, but I could see the vulnerability in her expression. You looked surprised, and you didn't say anything at first. I thought maybe you thought I was being, I don't know, showing off or something. My heart broke a little. Here was my daughter, who had just done something extraordinarily beautiful, worried that she'd somehow disappointed me. "Emma, look at me," I said gently. She turned those serious brown eyes toward me. I wasn't embarrassed. I was stunned. I was watching my 12-year-old daughter do something that most adults wouldn't think to do, and do it without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. I was watching you be the person your mom and I always hoped you'd become. Her smile grew wider. "Really? Really? And you know what else? I realized something today." "What?" "I realized that all this time I've been worried about you being too kind, too giving, too willing to help others. I thought maybe I was raising you wrong, that maybe you needed to be tougher, more selfish." I paused, choosing my words carefully. But what happened today showed me that kindness isn't weakness. It's strength. It takes courage to see someone hurting and decide to do something about it. Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Mom used to say that being kind when it's easy doesn't count as much as being kind when it's hard." She was right. And what you did today? That was the hard kind. You gave up something you wanted to help someone you didn't even know. "But it didn't feel hard," Emma said, looking confused. "It just felt, right." That's when it hit me. For Emma, kindness wasn't a choice she had to make. It was just who she was. It was so deeply ingrained in her character that helping Mrs. Chen had been as natural as breathing. As we carried our groceries inside, my phone started buzzing with text messages. Word was already spreading through our small town about what had happened at the grocery store. The first message was from my neighbor, Linda. "Just heard about Emma at the store. You should be so proud." Then from Mike, "Someone posted about your daughter on the town Facebook page. You need to see this." I opened Facebook to find a post from someone named Jennifer Walsh. "To the young girl at the grocery store today who paid for strangers' groceries, you restored my faith in humanity. Your parents raised you right. This town is lucky to have you." The post already had dozens of comments and shares. People were sharing their own stories of kindness, talking about how Emma's actions had inspired them to look for ways to help others. But the message that made me tear up came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, Emma's teacher, who had once told me Emma was too sensitive. "Mr. Williams, I heard about what Emma did today. I owe you an apology. I was wrong about her sensitivity being a weakness. What she did took tremendous strength of character. You've raised an exceptional young woman." Over the next few days, the ripple effects continued. Margaret Chen called to invite Emma to volunteer at the Senior Center's reading program. The grocery store manager reached out to ask if Emma would be interested in being featured in their community newsletter. 3 different churches contacted us about youth volunteer opportunities. But the most meaningful consequence came that Wednesday when Emma returned from school with a different energy than usual. "Dad, you'll never guess what happened today," she said, practically bouncing as she dropped her backpack. "Tell me. Remember Tyler, the 6th grader I helped when those boys were picking on him?" I nodded. "Well, today I saw him helping a kindergartner who had dropped her lunch all over the cafeteria floor. When I asked him about it later, he said he remembered how good it felt when someone helped him, so he wanted to help someone else." "That's wonderful, Em. And that's not all. Marcus started a book club for kids who eat lunch alone. And Sophia, the quiet girl in my class, she stood up to some 8th graders who were making fun of a special needs kid. She told me she thought about what I would do and decided to be brave." I sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the realization of what was happening. Emma's kindness wasn't just affecting the people she helped directly. It was spreading, inspiring others to act with compassion. "You know what this means, don't you?" I asked her. Emma tilted her head, curious. "It means that what you did at the grocery store, what you do every day at school, what you've always done, it matters more than I ever understood. You're not just being kind to individuals. You're teaching other people how to be kind too." That evening, as I tucked Emma into bed, she asked me one more question. "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of what I did?" I sat on the edge of her bed, thinking about Sarah and all the conversations we'd had about the kind of person we wanted to raise, about values and character and making a difference in the world. "Emma," I said softly, "I think your mom is looking down at you right now with the biggest smile imaginable. I think she's telling everyone in heaven about her daughter who sees people who are hurting and decides to help them no matter what." Emma smiled sleepily. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." As I turned off her light and closed her door, I realized that the grocery store had changed more than just Margaret Chen's day. It had changed my entire perspective on parenting, on values, on what it meant to raise a child right. I wasn't failing as a parent. I was succeeding beyond my wildest dreams. That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and really thought about what had happened. Not just at the grocery store, but over the past 3 years since Sarah's death. All the doubt, all the second-guessing, all the times I'd wondered if I was raising Emma wrong. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos from better times. Sarah and Emma baking cookies, reading together, volunteering at the animal shelter. In every picture I could see it, the foundation of kindness that Sarah had been building in our daughter from day one. The gentle way Sarah corrected Emma's behavior, always explaining why kindness mattered, why we help others, why character was more important than popularity. I'd been so focused on protecting Emma from a world that might take advantage of her goodness that I'd almost lost sight of the fact that her goodness was exactly what the world needed. The truth hit me like a revelation. I hadn't been raising Emma wrong. I'd been raising her exactly right. Every bedtime story about heroes who helped others, every conversation about treating people with respect, every time we'd chosen to do the harder but kinder thing, it had all been building toward moments like the one in the grocery store. But here's what really got to me. Emma's kindness wasn't making her weak or vulnerable. It was making her powerful. I'd watched a 12-year-old girl transform an entire checkout line full of strangers into a community of people who cared about each other. That's not weakness, that's leadership. I thought about all the parenting advice I'd been getting, all the voices telling me Emma needed to be tougher, more competitive, more focused on herself. What if they were wrong? What if the world didn't need more people who only looked out for themselves? What if it needed more people like Emma? The next morning, I called my brother Mike. I figured it out, I told him without preamble. Figured what out? Why I've been so worried about Emma. Why I kept thinking I was doing something wrong. Mike waited for me to continue. I was trying to raise her for the world as it is, instead of raising her to be the kind of person who could make the world better. There was a pause. That's pretty deep for 8 a.m., Jake. I'm serious. Sarah and I always talked about raising a good human being, but somewhere along the way, I started worrying more about raising a successful human being. Like those were two different things. And now? Now I realize they're the same thing. Emma is successful. Maybe not in the way other parents measure success, but in the way that actually matters. She's successful at being human. That conversation led to others. I started reaching out to parents whose kids were friends with Emma. The quiet ones, the kind ones, the ones who didn't always fit in, but who had something special about them. I discovered a whole network of families who were trying to raise children with character in a world that often seemed to reward the opposite. We started having regular coffee meetups, sharing stories and strategies. It wasn't a formal group or anything, just parents who believed that kindness mattered, that empathy was a strength, that raising good humans was the most important job we'd ever have. But the biggest lesson came from watching Emma in the weeks following the grocery store incident. I expected her to change somehow, to become more aware of her impact on others, maybe even a little proud of the attention she was getting. Instead, she just kept being Emma. She helped Mrs. Chen at the library every Wednesday. She sat with the lonely kids at lunch. She stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. The grocery store hadn't been a one-time burst of kindness. It was just who she was, every single day. That's when I understood the most important lesson of all. I hadn't taught Emma to be kind in that moment. I taught her to be kind as a way of life. The grocery store was just the moment when I finally saw what Sarah and I had been building all along. I also realized something about myself. All my worry, all my second-guessing, it hadn't been about Emma at all. It had been about my own fear of being judged as a parent. I'd been so concerned about what other people thought of my parenting choices that I'd almost lost sight of the incredible human being those choices were creating. Sarah used to say that parenting wasn't about raising children who would make us look good. It was about raising children who would make the world better. I'd forgotten that lesson in my grief and uncertainty, but Emma had never forgotten it. She was living it every day. The grocery store didn't teach me that I was raising Emma right. It taught me to trust what I already knew. That kindness is never wasted. That character matters more than popularity. And that sometimes the best thing you can do as a parent is get out of your child's way and let them be exactly who they're meant to be. It's been 6 months since that day at the grocery store, and I wish I could tell you that everything changed overnight, that Emma suddenly became the most popular kid in school and all my parenting doubts disappeared forever. But that's not how real life works, and honestly, I'm glad it doesn't. What did change was my perspective. Emma is still the same thoughtful, kind, quietly determined girl she's always been. She still chooses to sit with the lonely kids at lunch. She still stands up for people who can't stand up for themselves. She still volunteers at the library every Wednesday with Mrs. Chen, who has become something of a surrogate grandmother to her. But now I see these things for what they really are. Not signs that she's too soft for the world, but evidence that she's exactly what the world needs. Last month, Emma's school started a peer mediation program. And guess who they asked to help train the student mediators? My too sensitive daughter, who apparently has a gift for helping people resolve conflicts peacefully. The principal, Mrs. Taylor, told me that Emma has a way of making everyone feel heard and valued, even when they disagree. She's going to change the world someday, Mrs. Taylor said. Maybe not in a flashy way, but in the way that really matters. I think about that conversation a lot, about how we measure success, how we define strength, how we decide what kind of people we want our children to become. The grocery store taught me that I'd been asking the wrong questions all along. Instead of, is Emma tough enough for the world? I should have been asking, is the world ready for Emma? Margaret Chen still comes to our house for dinner once a month. She and Emma have developed a beautiful friendship that spans generations. Margaret tells stories about her late husband and her years as a teacher, while Emma shares her dreams of becoming a veterinarian so she can help animals who can't help themselves. Your daughter saved my life that day, Margaret told me recently. Not just by paying for my groceries, but by reminding me that I still mattered to someone, that there was still kindness in the world. That's when I realized something profound. Emma's kindness doesn't just help the people she's kind to, it helps everyone who witnesses it. It spreads like ripples in a pond, touching lives in ways we might never fully understand. The town Facebook page still shares stories about random acts of kindness, many of them inspired by what happened that Saturday afternoon. The grocery store manager told me they've seen an increase in customers helping each other, paying for strangers' items, offering assistance to elderly shoppers. It's like your daughter started something, he said, a movement of kindness. But perhaps the most meaningful change has been in me. I sleep better now, not because parenting has gotten easier, but because I finally trust that I'm doing it right. When Emma comes home with stories of helping classmates or standing up for someone being bullied, I don't worry anymore about whether she's being taken advantage of. I celebrate the fact that she's being exactly who she's supposed to be. Sarah would be proud, not just of Emma, but of both of us. She'd be proud that I finally learned to trust the foundation we built together, that I stopped second-guessing the values we instilled in our daughter. Last week, Emma asked me if we could start a family tradition of volunteering together once a month. I want to help more people, she said simply, and I think it would be fun to do it together. So now we volunteer at the food bank every third Saturday, sorting donations and helping families in need. Emma approaches it with the same quiet determination she brings to everything else, treating every person with dignity and respect. Watching her interact with families who are struggling, seeing how naturally she connects with children who are scared or embarrassed, I'm reminded again of that day in the grocery store. This is who she is. This is who she's always been. I want to end with something for the parents who might be reading this, especially those who are raising sensitive, empathetic children in a world that sometimes seems to reward the opposite. Trust your instincts. Trust the values you're teaching. Trust that kindness is strength, that empathy is power, that raising a good human being is the most important thing you'll ever do. Your child might not be the loudest or the most popular or the most aggressive, but if you're raising them to see others, to care about others, to help others, then you're raising exactly the kind of person the world desperately needs. The grocery store taught me that I hadn't been failing as a parent. I'd been succeeding in ways I was too worried to see. So tell me, what moment made you realize you were raising your child? Exactly right. I'd love to hear your stories, because I'm learning that these moments of clarity, these glimpses of who our children really are, they're everywhere if we just know how to look for them. Sometimes the most ordinary moments reveal the most extraordinary truths.